The girl's body had been grotesquely jammed into a crevice not even 10 centimeters wide. Her skeleton was completely shattered and warped. Yet, eerily, she had predicted and documented her killer 2 years earlier. "It was Daddy who killed me," she had written. Late one night, while I was on shift, a desperate call shattered the silence. "Police, my husband has murdered our daughter," the woman wailed piercingly over the phone. After disconnecting, I rushed to the address she had provided. Our region is nestled in the mountains, and that night, I was the sole officer on duty. The woman's front door was slightly open, a mere sliver. Darkness enveloped the interior, devoid of any illumination. With caution, I nudged the door open. The pungent scent of blood furrowed my brow. Under my feet, there was a moistness, as if I had stepped into some liquid. Looking down with the help of the moonlight outside, I saw the ground awash with blood. That explained the intense blood scent. With such extensive blood loss, survival seemed impossible. A heaviness settled in my heart. At that moment, the sounds of an argument between a man and a woman drifted from inside. "Lin Shaoling," I called out. The woman inside whipped around. Her face was a curious anomaly. It seemed simultaneously old and young. Her features were youthful, but her skin sagged severely. The woman's eyes were wide with panic. As soon as she spotted me, she lunged forward as though clinging to a lifeline. Her hands tightly clasped my arms. "Officer, my husband has killed our daughter," she exclaimed. Her grip was painfully strong. I turned to look at the man standing silently off to the side, presumably her husband. He met my gaze with a mournful, resigned smile. "I didn't kill my daughter. Show me where her body is," I commanded. Through her sobs, the woman faltered, "She's in the kitchen." I stepped into the kitchen. The floor there too was smeared with blood. Blood had splattered across the stove and faucet. The amount of bloodshed was overwhelming. I soon discovered the girl's body. It was crammed into a narrow crevice between the refrigerator and the wall, a crevice less than 10 centimeters wide. In such a confined space, a girl had been forced. Having graduated from the police academy only last year, I was new to this assignment. Typically, I dealt with minor neighborhood squabbles and disputes. This case, I knew, was more than I could manage alone. I urgently requested backup from the police force. Shortly, Captain Song, my superior, arrived with additional officers. The forensic team extracted the body. This was my first encounter with an actual corpse. The girl's body was a sight of sheer horror. Her body was soft, her bones almost completely broken and distorted. It was as though we were retrieving a blood-drenched figure. The savagery inflicted upon a young girl was unimaginable. Several young officers, myself included, struggled to suppress their nausea. Captain Song, however, remained decidedly composed. He escorted the couple to the station for questioning. Patting my shoulder, Captain Song remarked, "Ji Xiang, you're a woman, but your strength impresses me. This interrogation is yours to lead." I nodded in affirmation. "I will not let you down." Stepping into the interrogation room, I first questioned Lin Shaoling. "Lin Shaoling, I need a full account of the events." I handed her a glass of water. She bowed her head, leaving the water untouched, and her hoarse voice filled the silence. "I suffer from severe insomnia, waking at the slightest noise. But tonight was different. I heard nothing and slept deeply. I suspect my husband gave me sleeping pills. Suddenly, around midnight, I awoke. I ventured into the living room to find it bathed in blood. Terrified, I cried out for my husband and daughter, but there was no response. The living room was shrouded in darkness, save for a light from the kitchen. I saw my daughter's body jammed into the crevice, her face grotesquely compressed. Her head was still agonizingly trying to turn. Panic seized me. As I recovered my composure, I frantically attempted to pull her out, but she was immovable. I wept uncontrollably. My daughter's eyes rolled towards me. Her eyes were unnaturally wide, emitting a rasping sound from her throat. I sensed her desperate attempt to direct my attention behind me. Turning, I saw my husband standing there. At this point, I had to interrupt her. So, you didn't actually witness your husband kill your daughter? You're just concluding he's the murderer based on this alone. Lin Xiaoling, visibly shaken, sharply lifted her head to meet my gaze. Of course not. I knew 2 years ago, though I hadn't taken it seriously back then. She flashed an eerie smile. 2 years ago? My concern intensified. Ever heard of a time capsule? It's buried and retrieved years later. It was a school assignment for my daughter. She eagerly wrote something down and sealed it in a tin box. I was curious to know what my daughter had written. With a mysterious air, she told me, "It's a secret. My husband was responsible for burying the tin box. Yet, I must admit, I'm an overly controlling mother. I'm aware it's wrong, even pathological. However, that night, I succumbed to my impulses. I unearthed the tin box. I did this covertly. I knew full well my husband wouldn't condone it. Upon opening the tin box, I gently removed the note. It declared, 'Daddy killed me.'" As she spoke, Lin Xiaoling's face began to quiver. "So, your daughter foresaw her own demise 2 years prior and pinpointed her killer?" I questioned. Lin Xiaoling's story was hard to accept. Given her daughter's current age, she was merely 9 2 years ago. A 9-year-old sensing such danger from her father would naturally turn to her mother for help. Yet, she opted to confide in a time capsule. That just doesn't add up. Could it be that this was merely a prank? Children today are often quite mature and influenced by the myriad dramas they watch, I suggested skeptically. When I first read the note, I reacted just as you are now, Lin Xiaoling acknowledged. Though I knew my daughter always spoke with consideration, I still dismissed it as a prank. After all, my husband has always been nothing short of wonderful to us. You seem to have been raised in the city? However, we're from this village, born and raised. Life here is hard, and my husband works tirelessly from dawn until dusk to provide a better future for our daughter. Many people jokingly call him a slave to his daughter. I never harbored any suspicions towards him. I was about to replace the note when, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed my husband standing silently behind me. I couldn't tell how long he'd been there, observing me without expression. "You scared me to death." I was startled, initially thinking my daughter had discovered me unearthing the capsule. Then my husband chuckled oddly. It was a disturbing smile, his lips unnaturally stretched, his eyes wide open. "What does the note say, wife?" He stared intently at me. At that instant, a profound unease washed over me. I didn't reveal the truth to him. I told him the note wished for our family to be forever happy. As Lin Xiaoling recounted this, she coughed several times, her complexion ghostly pale. "Have some water," I suggested. Lin Xiaoling licked her parched lips and this time accepted the water, gulping it down. Just then, my phone buzzed with a message from Captain Song. He relayed that the forensic autopsy report was complete. I asked Lin Xiaoling to hold on for a moment. I accompanied Captain Song outside. His expression was somber. "Ji Xiang, there's something peculiar about this corpse." I glanced at him, puzzled, not sure what he meant by peculiar. No fingerprints or skin tissues have been detected on the body's intact skin. But the most bizarre aspect is that the hands and feet are switched. "Ever seen anyone with their hands and feet switched?" he asked, his voice laden with gravity. I paused, trying to grasp the meaning. Switched hands and feet? What could that mean? "Come take a look. It will make sense then." We headed to the room where the body was stored. The girl's body lay there temporarily. Fighting back my unease, I focused intently on the body. A chill coursed through me. I hadn't noticed any abnormalities when we first retrieved her due to my anxiety. Under the harsh glow of the incandescent lights, it was clear. Where her hands should be, there were feet. Her toes were excessively long, twice the length of a typical human's. As Captain Song had described, her hands and feet were indeed switched. "This is a person with deformities." I struggled to swallow, a sense of unease tightening my throat. A thought emerged in my mind. Could her deformity have driven her father to murder her? However, There's currently no evidence directly implicating the father in his daughter's death. Suddenly, the incandescent light above flickered. A sharp click echoed. Someone had hit a switch, plunging the room into darkness. "Who's there?" Captain Song barked. The room was suffocated by an eerie silence. At that moment, I felt an intense gaze piercing through the darkness behind me. I spun around swiftly. Two emotionless faces loomed closely behind us. Lin Xiaoling's face was inches from mine. "What are you doing?" I exclaimed. Lin Xiaoling's smile was unervingly stiff. "Officer, I just wanted to see my daughter," she said. Captain Song moved to flick the lights back on, his expression tense. The moment Lin Xiaoling glimpsed her daughter, she bolted towards her. Her cries were laden with desperate anguish. "My darling, I failed to keep you safe." I kept my eyes fixed on the girl's body, feeling increasingly certain something was amiss. I distinctly remembered the body's hands being positioned further to the left. Yet, now both of the girl's arms lay unnaturally to the right. A disturbing sensation crept along my spine. The couple was promptly returned to the interrogation room. Captain Song sparked a cigarette, inhaled deeply, and let the smoke drift slowly from his lips. "Ji Xiong, something about this doesn't sit right." I acknowledged the oddity of the case. "Ji Xiong, it's not just the case I'm concerned about. It's the couple too," he elaborated. His face, typically calm and collected, now carried a shadow of concern. "You could clearly see the couple's faces when the lights went out, couldn't you?" I paused, a shiver trailing down my spine as I realized what Captain Song was suggesting. The room had been cloaked in total darkness. I could barely see Captain Song at my side. And yet, Lin Xiaoling and her husband's faces appeared starkly visible, as if lit from within. Having been a steadfast atheist for more than 2 decades, I was suddenly filled with doubt. This entire affair was deeply strange. Not just the bizarre nature of the case, but the couple themselves. "What has Lin Xiaoling said?" Captain Song queried. I summarized what I had learned from Lin Xiaoling for Captain Song. He knitted his brows. "Let's set Lin Xiaoling's account aside for now and listen to what her husband has to say." I entered another room. The man sat with his head bowed, unresponsive even to my arrival, frozen in position. "Li Long," I called his name. He slowly raised his head, his features worn and drained of color. He preempted my words with a weary smile. "I know you think I killed my daughter, but that's unimaginable. I loved my daughter perhaps even more than myself. Her deformities never swayed my love. Officer, you appear to be in your early 20s. Without children, it's hard for you to grasp a father's emotions. I apologize if I've said too much. I believe it was my wife who killed our daughter." I spoke with gravity. "So, you think it was your wife who killed your daughter?" Just then, Li Long's eyes shifted abruptly, glancing to my right, as if he saw something beside me. Compelled, I looked over my shoulder, but my right side was barren, nothing there. "Li Long, is there something next to me?" I asked softly. Li Long's eyes briefly darted. "No. Did you actually witness your wife killing your daughter?" I pressed. Bruce Lee shook his head. He swiftly moistened his parched lips, his expression gradually revealing a deep-seated fear. "That particular day, the school had tasked my daughter with a project, to bury a time capsule. She wrote a note and sealed it in a metal box, which I personally placed in the ground. I inquired about her message, but she declared it a secret. Yet, her eyes remained locked on mine, brimming with terror and a silent plea for aid. I know my daughter intimately. I sensed she had something urgent she wished to convey. At first, I feared she might be enduring bullying at school. Her appearance has long been a target for mockery. Thus, under the veil of night and while my wife lay deep in slumber, I excavated the box. Written on it was a solitary, chilling sentence. "Mom killed me." At this juncture, I frowned. Lin Xiaoling and Li Long's accounts of the note's contents diverged sharply. Clearly, one was not telling the truth. I gestured for Li Long to proceed. I was utterly shocked by the note's message. My first instinct was that my daughter was merely jesting. How could she pen such a line if she were truly well? I was about to return the note and consult my daughter for details when I caught sight of someone lurking at the downstairs living room window. There was Xiaoling, her entire face smashed against the glass. It was less a press and more a forceful crush. Even from afar, I felt her piercing stare. A real chill coursed through me then. Without thinking, I ripped the note apart. When I re-entered the living room, Xiaoling was perched on the sofa. With an eerie smile, she queried, "Why did you read the note our daughter wrote? What did it say?" Her smile was unsettling. "Officer, have you ever seen anyone smile like that?" Her lips were unnaturally stretched upwards, nearly touching her ears. I reassured her that the note merely held wishes for our well-being, nothing else. Xiaoling acknowledged with a grunt and sluggishly retreated to her room. Li Long drew a deep breath, abruptly looked directly into my eyes, and murmured, "I fear that was not my wife." I halted my recording momentarily. "Li Long, what do you mean by that?" Li Long tousled his hair, visibly disturbed. Simultaneously, I noted Li Long's recurrent glances to my right. Yet when I turned, there was simply nothing there. I could no longer contain myself. "Li Long, you've cast at least a dozen furtive glances to my right since we began. What are you seeing?" Li Long's face blanched suddenly. His lips fluttered twice, yet he offered no reply. "Miss, what I am about to share might stretch the bounds of belief, but I implore you to trust me. My wife has been usurped." I tapped my fingers against the tabletop, prompting, "Continue." The day after, I sought out my daughter alone, desperate to understand the cryptic message scribbled on the note. I assured her, "Nan Nan, confide in Daddy. I will shield you. No harm will come your way." Her lips trembled, then abruptly, her gaze shifted past my shoulder. She extended her finger, directing it toward the door. Perplexed, I ventured outside. There was ostensibly nothing there. Yet, as I discerned the details on the door, a cold shudder swept through me. The door was completely covered with dense, ear-shaped impressions. Clearly, someone had been forcefully pressing their ear against the door, leaving such stark traces. A surge of panic gripped me. Someone had been surreptitiously listening to the activities inside my daughter's room. I raced to my daughter, lowering my voice to ask, was it her mother? She offered no reply. Despite my persistent inquiries, she refused to speak a word. "Dad, if I utter the wrong words, I'll be killed." With those words, my daughter whispered to me tearfully, her voice barely audible. She is only 9, yet far from the kind to jest about such matters. This made me profoundly suspect that something was gravely amiss with my wife. She had never been fond of meat, yet now she consumed it with a ravenous zeal. Breaking the heavy silence, Li Long abruptly asked, "Could I have a cigarette? I am somewhat frightened." I paused briefly before fulfilling Li Long's request. Upon entering Captain Song's office, I encountered his unusually grave demeanor. He was absorbed in the surveillance footage, his long fingers tapping incessantly on the desk, his eyebrows knitted tightly. In my half-year tenure, I had never seen Captain Song display such distress. "Ji Xiang, brace yourself for what I'm about to show you," he advised. He played a video clip for me. It was the surveillance recording of my recent interrogation of Li Long. At first glance, nothing appeared out of the ordinary. It was only when I observed Li Long's repeated glances to my right that my own eyes narrowed sharply. I finally realized why he was so fixated on my right side. My own shadow was being reflected on the interrogation room's glass. Beside me, there stood a woman. To be precise, it was Lin Xiaoling. She stood unervingly close, her face nearly pressed against mine. Lin Xiaoling's eyes were unnaturally wide, her mouth contorted into a forced smile. This explained the sheer terror on Li Long's face. A shiver ran from the tips of my toes to the crown of my head. How can this be possible? I struggled to articulate. There had been nothing by my side just moments ago. Could Lin Xiaoling be a ghost? Was Li Long suggesting that his wife had been replaced, implying Lin Xiaoling had become spectral? At that moment, the ceiling light began to flicker anew, crackling ominously. I watched in horror as the movements of Lin Shaoling in the surveillance altered. Her head turned at a torturously slow pace. It felt as though an invisible hand was tightly gripping my heart. Subconsciously, I moved closer to Captain Song. Seconds later, the lighting normalized, and Lin Shaoling's stance was unchanged. It seemed as if it had all been an illusion. Yet, embarrassingly, in my moment of terror, I had reflexively ended up sitting on Captain Song's lap. I clambered off, apologizing profusely, my cheeks flushed with mortification. Captain Song responded nonchalantly, though I noted a subtle flush coloring the tips of his ears. We resolved to interrogate Lin Shaoling and Li Long separately this time. Reapproaching Li Long, I was besieged by a profound sense of unease. This case was unnervingly bizarre. I extended the cigarette he had requested. Li Long clutched it shakily and took a deep inhale. I quickly became aware of my wife's transformation. Formerly averse to meat, she now harbored an intense obsession with it. She would bring home various unidentifiable meats daily. She had even acquired a taste for animal eyes. That day marked my daughter's birthday. Numerous children gathered at our home for the festivities. Shaoling had prepared the cake early in the morning, appearing unchanged at first glance. Our wardrobe features a hole just large enough for fingers to pass through, originally intended to prevent our daughter from potentially crawling in and suffocating. The children, all around 10, were invariably intrigued by this odd hole and took turns inserting their hands. However, they quickly retracted their hands, terror etched across their faces. "Uncle, there's someone inside grabbing our hands," they exclaimed, fraught with alarm. I chuckled, dismissing the notion that someone could actually be inside. The wardrobe was notably small, fitting only a single child at most. All the children, my daughter included, were nearby. I reassured them, "There's no need to be afraid. It's impossible for anyone to be inside." To prove my point, I reached my hand into the hole. However, my expression quickly stiffened. I distinctly felt something icy and clammy seizing my hand. It resembled the grasp of human fingers. I swung open the wardrobe doors. At the sight inside, the children emitted piercing screams. My wife, her hair wild and untamed, was huddled inside. How she had managed to fit herself in there was beyond me. She offered us a grin, claiming it was meant as a surprise for our daughter. Lin Shaoling's smile was profoundly disturbing. After that incident, no child ever braved a visit to our house again. I also observed that my wife appeared to be constantly surveilling me. Occasionally, as we sat watching TV together, her eyes seemed glued to the screen. Yet, reflected in the screen, her gaze was intensely focused on me. We were watching a horror movie that day, about a husband who discovers his wife is a murderer. The film ended with the husband being savagely killed by his wife. It was a horrifically violent film, yet throughout it, Shaoling continued to giggle eerily. The most unnerving moment was when she suddenly turned, asking me that question. "Honey, what exactly did that note say?" Li Long snuffed out his cigarette with force as he spoke, his words sending a chill through me. Truly, they were frightening. I remembered the surveillance footage I had seen, feeling a cold shiver run through me. Do you know why she felt compelled to watch over me? She was desperate to discover whether I had stumbled upon her secret, just as she watched her daughter. Later, I unraveled the mystery my daughter had stumbled upon. 2 months prior, as I was tidying her room, I fell, and beneath her bed, I found a face concealed. A face contorted and compressed beyond all recognition. Though her features were gruesomely misshapen, I still recognized her. It was my wife. At last, everything clicked. Why my daughter was so petrified of the woman she now called mother. Why she had scribbled down a prophecy of her own demise. Because the woman posing as Lin Shaoling was no longer human. The genuine Lin Shaoling had been slain and stuffed into the narrow space beneath the bed. Mysteriously, the air bore no trace of the stench of decay. Do you know what the Shaoling I beheld resembled? She was like a pancake. A living person had been compressed into the shape of a pancake. In that moment, behind me, my daughter's gasps of terror filled the air. She urged me to feign ignorance of the secret. If not, that woman would surely kill us. For 2 months, we lived under the shadow of terror. Yet, it never crossed my mind that she would still manage to murder my daughter. Li Long's eyes were laced with bloodshot threads as he shuddered and spoke. Take heed of that woman, for she is not merely unhuman. She is a ghost. His voice dropped to a whisper, his eyelids twitching wildly from fear. My hands were coated in cold sweat. Then, a message from Captain Song summoned me outside. As I rose to leave, my pen slipped from my grasp, clattering to the floor. Bending to retrieve it, I froze, for there was Li Long, whose head had unnaturally fallen back, his gaze empty as he stared at me. Is such a posture normal? I backed away, exclaiming, Li Long, what are you doing? Suddenly aware of his odd posture, Li Long returned to his seat, his face ashen. After confirming there were no further unusual behaviors, I left the room. Captain Song's desk was cluttered with recently extinguished cigarette stubs. Captain Song, what is the current status with Lin Xiaoling? You know, her statements are diametrically opposed to Li Long's. A chill ran through me. Captain Song handed me a document. Contained a full page of Lin Xiaoling's interrogation transcript. Li Long remained silent after my comments, but the distrust in his eyes was unmistakable. I wasted no time in tearing up that note as soon as he departed. The next morning, I rushed to my daughter's room to inquire about the contents of the note. She shuddered as though she had heard something profoundly terrifying. Mom, I cannot tell you, or he will surely kill me. I hastily assured her that I would let no harm come her way. Her little toes tightly clenched my garment. Born with deformities, she has long used her feet as hands. Mom, you cannot save me. If his secret is uncovered, it will be the death of me, and you too, so I cannot reveal it. Suddenly, she looked upward. I noticed 2 handprints on the ceiling. The handprints were large and unmistakably not those of my daughter. They were deeply set, suggesting they had been made over an extended period. I shuddered at the thought of someone lying there night after night, intensely scrutinizing my daughter. This only deepened my certainty that my husband was no longer himself. He had always been allergic to mangoes. Yet, when I deliberately served him mangoes to test him, he ate them with no reaction, his face devoid of expression. Moreover, he had been incessantly monitoring me, his eyes constantly on me. 2 months prior, I had stumbled upon his chilling secret. On a particularly hot day, I had switched on the air conditioner. Almost immediately, something felt wrong. The air was foul-smelling, with an accompanying grinding noise. Suspecting a blockage, I extracted the air conditioner's filter. As soon as I did, a nauseating stench assailed me. There, grotesquely distorted, was part of my husband's body. His head, compressed, was jammed in the filter. I retched uncontrollably. This was the secret my daughter had alluded to, the dreadful secret of my husband's long-ago death. Struggling against my revulsion, I reinstalled the filter. At that very moment, Li Long's voice echoed from behind. His gaze was intense, his smile unervingly peculiar. Honey, did you just turn on the air conditioner? Do you detect any peculiar odors? I quickly assured him I smelled nothing unusual. For 2 months, my daughter and I had been ensnared by fear. Yet, he still murdered my daughter. This narrative starkly contrasted with that of Li Long. Each spouse accused the other of the heinous act. But who truly killed the girl? Then, Captain Song informed me that Lin Xiaoling's family had just arrived at the police station. At the entrance, we met a middle-aged man of simple appearance. He rose, visibly uneasy, and introduced himself as Lin Xiaoling's brother, Lin Hua. I escorted him to a private room. After summarizing the situation for Lin Hua, he abruptly lifted his head, his expression one of stark dismay. They never had a daughter, he declared. What then is that thing lying there? Exchanging a glance with Captain Song, both of our faces mirrored the shock we felt. The case had seemed as twisted as possible, yet now it veered into an even more grotesque mystery. Are you absolutely sure Lin Xiaoling has no daughter? I queried, probing deeper. Lin Hua nodded, his complexion ghostly pale. My sister suffered from a condition in her youth that made it impossible for her to conceive. She absolutely cannot have children. She also has a pronounced preference for boys over girls and markedly dislikes little girls. I remember once when I took my daughter to her place. A minor accident with some spilled water resulted in Xiaoling slapping her. I never visited her home again after that. However, unexpectedly one day, she announced that she was pregnant, that she had a child. At that moment, although I was astounded, I felt joy for her as well. I entertained the thought that perhaps there had been a misdiagnosis and Xiaoling was indeed fertile. As a caring brother, I purchased many health supplements and visited her. Indeed, her abdomen had visibly enlarged. Xiaoling caressed her belly, her expression awash with maternal warmth. I ventured, "And if it's a girl?" Xiaoling responded with a laugh, "Boy or girl, they are my children all the same." This filled me with joy, thinking perhaps my sister had truly changed. Later, when my brother-in-law arrived home, his countenance was starkly grim, devoid of any paternal bliss. In fact, he appeared genuinely terrified. The fear in his eyes when he glanced at Xiaoling was palpable. At first, I assumed he was merely overwhelmed by his new role as a father. As I departed, my brother-in-law courteously saw me to the door. He cast a nervous glance inside, then in a hushed, hurried tone, informed me that Xiaoling was not pregnant. Her brother-in-law then presented Xiaoling's medical report. Emblazoned on it were the words, "infertile." Moreover, this report was issued just 3 days ago. Yet, Xiaoling had asserted that she was 3 months pregnant. Her brother-in-law, his eyes brimming with tears, confided, "Brother-in-law, I initially thought Xiaoling was ill, so we went to the hospital. Surprisingly, the tests revealed she was in better health than ever, but the ultrasound confirmed there was no child in her womb." I then grasped the depth of her brother-in-law's terror. If it had been me, I would have been equally frightened. It was as if a child had inexplicably manifested in my sister's body. A week later, I called her brother-in-law to inquire after Xiaoling's well-being. "Brother-in-law, Xiaoling and the baby are both fine. You can relax," he assured me cheerfully. This puzzled me deeply. He was well aware that Xiaoling could not bear children. His demeanor had changed dramatically, gleefully sharing updates about the baby's antics. "Brother-in-law, you wouldn't believe it, but yesterday the baby gave me a little kick. Such a spirited little one," he shared. His words only heightened my sense of unease. Evidently, this child didn't exist. Concerned about my sister and her husband, I made an early morning visit the next day. Upon my arrival, I found my brother-in-law joyously pressing his face against my sister's enlarged belly. "Brother-in-law, the baby just moved again." Remarkably, though my sister was barely 3 months pregnant, her belly was larger than my wife's at 7 months. Instinctively, I felt something was amiss. I approached and gently touched my sister's belly. Believe it or not, I distinctly felt movement. At that moment, even I started to wonder if perhaps there really was a child in my sister's womb. My brother-in-law then showed me the ultrasound report. With a surge of excitement, he pointed out, "Brother-in-law, though the doctor mentioned the baby might have deformities, with her limbs appearing reversed, we still deeply love her. She bears a striking resemblance to Xiaoling." The more enthusiastic he grew, the more unsettling it felt to me. Looking at the report, I saw absolutely nothing. No outline of a child whatsoever. Additionally, given Xiaoling was just over 3 months pregnant, it would normally be another 3 months before the fetus's features could begin to be distinguished. At that point, I feared that both my sister and her husband were deluding themselves. Later, as work consumed my time, I was unable to follow up with visits to Xiaoling. A month later, my brother-in-law called out of the blue to tell me that Xiaoling had delivered the baby at home. Can you imagine what went through my mind? I hastened to Xiaoling's residence. I found both Xiaoling and her husband beaming beside an entirely empty crib. It was uncannily eerie. There was plainly nothing there. The child simply did not exist. Yet, They persistently described the child's features. They spoke of a lovely girl, merely with her limbs reversed. My brother-in-law was incessantly recording with a camera. I walked away from that scene in a haze. Clearly, my sister and her husband had descended into madness. Yet, just as I was about to leave, I distinctly heard the cry of a child. It was piercing, akin to a kitten's cry. At this, the man's head sank, his fingers fretfully twined. Suddenly, his eyes flared wide open. Subsequently, I too started to wonder if there really might be a child with reversed limbs. Each time I visited Xiaoling's home, I would often hear the eerie, high-pitched cries and laughter of a child. The laughter, unnervingly sharp, seemed to bore into your very bones. Occasionally, I observed Xiaoling nursing the child. With my eyes glued to the scene, I saw Xiaoling feeding a bottle to the empty air. Yet the milk inside steadily decreased as if consumed by an invisible child. "Ah, brother-in-law, would you hold the baby for a second? She's climbed onto your leg," my brother-in-law said, his voice filled with laughter. I felt a distinct weight on my leg, as though something had indeed clambered onto it. That day I ran away, overwhelmed by fear. I have not set foot in Xiaoling's house since. You might deem me a neglectful brother, but the truth is, I was profoundly frightened. 2 weeks ago, Xiaoling mailed me a videotape. It was a recording made by my brother-in-law on the day the non-existent child was allegedly born. I played the tape. On screen, I saw the child. The child's limbs were reversed as she lay in her crib, her gaze fixated on me. Xiaoling had, impossibly, given birth to a phantom child. That child must be a specter. How else could one explain their actions? Please, even if my sister and her husband did end that child's existence, they didn't kill a person, they killed a ghost. Lin Hua exclaimed, his voice cracking with emotion. Suddenly, Lin Hua looked past me. I had never before witnessed such raw terror on a human face. "She's here. She's appeared right here." I spun around, my pupils contracting sharply. There, right behind me, was the girl who was believed to be dead, lying on the ground in a grotesquely twisted pose, her back facing us. My heart pounded wildly. Lin Hua shook uncontrollably, his scream a mix of terror and despair. Her head slowly rotated 180 degrees toward me, the chilling sound of cracking bones filling the air. The overhead lights flickered incessantly. Suddenly, I heard Captain Song tap sharply twice on the table. The distinct sound pierced the tense atmosphere. In an instant, the girl vanished. The lights steadied. I was still reeling from the shock. Just as I was about to ask Captain Song if he had seen what I had, I saw him approach Lin Hua. Standing over Lin Hua, who lay crumpled on the floor, Captain Song demanded in a chilling tone, "Are you ready to confess now?" I stared bewildered at Captain Song, unsure of his meaning. Lin Hua, struggling for breath, managed a defeated smile and weakly nodded. Just then, Xiao Chun burst in, announcing, "Captain Song, Lin Xiaoling and Li Long are both willing to confess." Stunned, I watched as Captain Song perceived my bewilderment and explained, "Ji Xiang, you'll soon understand everything. From the beginning, there was no murder case, no girl's body at all. None of this ever existed." I couldn't fathom what Captain Song was suggesting. He led me toward where the girl's body was reportedly stored. Puzzled, I followed him outside. Numerous individuals had arrived at the police station, including several high-ranking officials I recognized from TV. I quickly saluted and greeted them. They returned my salute with a reassuring smile, signaling for me to ease my nerves. Then Captain Song unveiled the grim reality. Ji Xiang, Lin Xiaoling, Li Long, and Lin Hua orchestrated a deeply malevolent child trafficking operation 3 months ago. Although I wasn't part of the team that uncovered this container child trafficking case, its cruelty was well known amongst us. 3 months ago, authorities discovered 3 containers filled with children aboard a cargo ship at a port. Opening the containers released a vile odor that overwhelmed everyone nearby. Reportedly, many of the officers present retched from the stench. Hundreds of children were found within, but only a few dozen survived. the majority of the children had died. The survivors were deformed, not inherently, but due to brutal interventions inflicted on them. These containers were initially destined for overseas transport. It was a disturbing element of a sinister industrial chain. Individuals with morbid tastes and deep pockets specifically seek out children who have been grotesquely modified through surgery. The girl you encountered was one of these children. Originally, her limbs were normal, but they had been surgically rearranged. Captain Song explained, his expression grave. He looked at me, his cold demeanor thawing slightly. However, Lin Shaoling and her co-conspirators are incredibly shrewd. They always keep their hands clean, making it difficult for us to extract any confessions or find tangible evidence. So, after much consideration, we decided to employ a unique technique to elicit their confessions. That technique was hypnosis. Given their high level of alertness, traditional hypnosis methods proved ineffective. To truly immerse them in hypnosis, we had to hypnotize one of our own. I gaped. So, I was that person, wasn't I? Captain Song nodded. Yes, you were. And the body I saw? I asked, driven by curiosity. That was simply a mannequin. And the blood you saw was fake as well. A man with a genteel demeanor then smiled and introduced himself as the hypnotist involved in the case. I recognized the police's strong sense of counter-surveillance, which is why I had Captain Song and your entire team collaborate with me. The most profound fears arise from the unknown. That's the basis of our fear of ghosts. In this session, I introduced a fabricated narrative into Lin Shaoling and Li Long's memories. They don't actually have children. The girl they thought was their daughter is actually a trafficked child. To sow discord among them, it was essential to foster mutual suspicion and fear. We devised memories where each thought the other was a ghost, eroding their trust and instilling a deep-seated fear. Are you telling me that their reports of seeing each other's corpses were all just effects of the hypnosis? I asked, shocked. The hypnotist smiled and nodded. As for the surveillance footage you saw, that too was a fabricated video we prepared in advance. There never was a murder case, nor any ghosts. Upon understanding the truth, the sheer potency of hypnosis left me astonished. But at that moment, a crisp sound of a switch being pressed filled the room. Instantly, the lights went out. Who turned off the lights? Voices quickly filled the silence. I didn't. Neither did I. Frozen, I stood rooted to the spot, shaking, unable to utter a word. Has the hypnosis session not ended? Queried, my voice quivering. Captain Song looked puzzled. Ji Xiang, what are you talking about? The hypnosis concluded quite some time ago. I stood motionless, speechless. Moments before, I had unmistakably seen an unnatural foot emerge from the shadows and press the light switch. Then, a chilling scream emanated from the room where Lin Shaoling and Li Long were detained. We sprinted to the scene immediately. A strong, metallic smell of blood overwhelmed my senses. The floor was wet underfoot. Captain Song turned on the light. What I saw next was terrifying. Lin Shaoling and Li Long were both dead. The blood had nearly soaked through my shoes. Ever seen a body crushed into something as thin as a sheet of dough? Li Long's head was severed from his body, or rather, each of his organs had been precisely arranged before us. A murder had unfolded silently right under our noses. Everyone's face was ghostly pale. This murder seemed beyond possibility. From the scream to our entry into the room, merely a minute had passed. In just 1 minute, they had been tortured to death so horrifically. Moreover, their deaths eerily resembled how they had imagined each other's demise during the hypnosis. Check the surveillance footage, Captain Song stated, his tone heavy with seriousness. We rapidly reviewed the video. Lin Shaoling and Li Long suddenly jerked their heads up, staring as though they had seen something horrific. Yet, the footage revealed nothing unusual. Then the lights flickered out. I observed an unnaturally pale foot appear on the screen, slowly moving to completely cover the camera lens. What is that? A young officer exclaimed, his voice tinged with alarm. No one answered him. A profound silence settled over us. I have now meticulously documented this incident. Due to its exceedingly strange nature, we've referred to this investigation as Case 818 Secret Files.